There's no denying the cross ram intakes from Holley and Edelbrock look awesome. The question is, do they also make power? First up, the Holley cross ram. First test, we want to compare the Holley cross ram. I'm not sure what they're calling it. It has the word sniper on it. So a sniper cross ram for a cathedral port application. And when I compared it to the factory early truck manifold, because that's what we had at the time for testing, our test motor was the 6-liter Gen 4 Big Bang motor, meaning it was a stock bottom end with ring gap, and it was a Gen 4, so it had good rods and had good pistons in it. Or, I mean, factory pistons, just had extra ring gap. The other thing that this thing had, and it developed sometime during the testing, was that it had a water leak. And I thought maybe, after all this testing, after running it at 1,543 horsepower with those turbos, and then running it with endless turbo testing after that at the 1,000 horsepower level with all kinds of stuff, going. But we found water getting into the oil. I thought, yeah, we probably cracked something. You know what? Hey, it deserves a rest. We've beat the heck out of it. But here's what it turned out to be. It actually turned out to be a crack down in one or more of the head stud holes. So down at the bottom of the hole. So what we have is water coming in through the hole and then spiraling its way up the head stud, and then getting into the head under the valve cover and just mixing with the oil. So it's not really a big deal, other than I don't like having a bunch of water in the oil. And it becomes problematic after a while because the oil gets a bunch of water in it. It gets all foamy and stuff. It doesn't work. But I remember taking the thing apart after we found water, and I thought, okay, here, you need to check this block. You need to have it magged or sonic or something, and let's check it and just find out where the crack is. And that way I know that we broke it. And it turned out they couldn't find anything. And then after we put it all back together and ran it again, it had more and more water, and finally we saw it, because this is not an uncommon thing for, you know, other kinds of motors like small block Fords and big block Chevys and stuff, where the stud actually goes down into the water jacket, and we have water that will come up those threads if you don't put sealant on them. And that's fairly common, but I had never seen it on an LS, so it's something interesting, and I'm not sure why those broke. You know, we're always very careful about putting stuff in. I don't just run the bolts in with a bunch of liquid in there and have it hydro the bottom of that thing, because we know that that's a common problem. So I'm not quite sure what happened there, but the thing is still running and it's still working, and we're still using this combination and beating the heck out of it. So it's that 6-liter Big Bang motor. It had the TrickFlow 225 heads on it. It had a fairly healthy cam in it that we got from Brian Tooley Racing, not the one that we ran when we did the Big Bang deal. It had a 614 595 lift split, a 237 252 degree duration split, and a 114 degree lobe separation angle. We ran it with 1 7/8 headers and a Holley HP management system. We ran the factory truck intake with the factory truck early manual throttle body. And I know I'm going to get a bunch of people screaming about this. Well, the other one, the cross ram, has 2 throttle bodies. Why didn't you run a bigger throttle body on the truck manifold? Because the opening in the throttle body is designed to accept the factory throttle body. I can run a 200 millimeter throttle body on the truck manifold, but if the opening is only 80 millimeters, it only flows what an 80 millimeter throttle body does. So I know we could put an adapter on it and stuff, but the reason that the truck manifold makes the power that it makes is not because of the throttle opening. It's because of the design of the intake. And the difference between these two, between this manifold and the cross ram, is not because of airflow. It's not because it has an extra throttle body on it, especially down at 3,500 RPM. That has nothing to do with airflow. That has everything to do with intake manifold design. So make sure to make comments and complain about the number of throttle bodies on there, so it'll be cool. But here's what happened when we ran our 6-liter test motor with the factory early truck intake and the headers and all that. It made 524 horsepower and 480 foot-pounds of torque. So it was doing pretty well. But here's what happened when we put the cross ram on there, the Holley cross ram, and we ran it with 2 throttle bodies, as I said. And I think that they were I'm going to say that were they 290s or 205 millimeter throttle bodies? 292 millimeter throttle bodies. Okay, so, and we can see that the gains here, the biggest gains happen down low, where it definitely is not a throttle opening size. We did get gains at the top, so this thing made 536 horsepower with the cross ram, but we got big torque gains down here. So down at 3,900, we went from 436 foot-pounds to 474 foot-pounds. So we saw some big gains. So it's nice that, and this is kind of a function, not particularly of the cross ram design. This is a function of, because it is a cross ram, it has really long runners. And so longer runners make more power down low, you know, and less up top. But this is the first time that I've really seen an intake manifold that I remember make more power than the truck intake everywhere. A lot of times we'll trade off power. Even with a fast manifold, there's a little bit of a trade-off compared to the factory truck deal. But on this one, you know, we didn't get huge gains up here. We picked up, well, 15, so that's not too bad. But down here, big torque gains from that cross ram. So if you're looking for something that looks cool, obviously cross ram, very cool looking, but it also performs, and especially down low, so it would be good for driving around, good snappy throttle response. Everything's good. Now let's check out the Edelbrock intake on the LS3 application. Test number 2 was another cross ram intake, this time from Edelbrock, and the Edelbrock cross ram actually fits the LS3 or rec port style, you know, cylinder heads, where the Holley one was designed for the cathedral port stuff, so I couldn't do a comparison directly between the two intake manifolds on the same combination. So we did the next best thing, and I ran the Edelbrock cross ram against the factory LS3 intake, which we know is really tough to beat. If you haven't taken a look at the big LS3 intake shootout, check it out. It's right here. Take a look at that and see how all of the other intakes compared to the factory intake, including this cross ram, because this test is actually in there. I wanted to include it in this video so that we can get a good comparison between two different style cross rams on two different motors, and you guys can kind of compare them and see what's going on. But this test motor was a factory LS3 crate motor. Excuse me. It had a healthy comp cam in it. It had that comp 54-469-11 camshaft in it. And that camshaft offered a 614-624 lift split, 231-247 degree duration split, and 113 degree load separation angle. We had big injectors in this thing. We had 89-pound injectors. We also had a 92mm throttle body, 1 7/8 headers, and we also had obviously a valve spring upgrade on the stock heads because we had enough camshaft in this, so we definitely had to have something other than the factory valve springs. The 1 7/8 headers just had collector extensions and no mufflers. We had the big throttle body on there, and all this was controlled with the Holley HP management system. So basically our cammed and headered LS3 produced 580 horsepower, which was really good. We had recently had the heads redone on this crate motor, so we had them milled slightly. I think that they only took 8 or 10 thousandths off, but they did a new valve job and stuff on it too, so it was something other than the factory valve job. Maybe the combination of those two, because this thing made a little bit more power than we normally expect. I run this combination a lot with this kind of camshaft on it, and this is the most that we've ever made after we redid the head, so it worked out pretty well. So this was with a factory LS3 intake manifold and a 92mm manual throttle body, because obviously we didn't use the factory drive-by-wire throttle body. But here's what happened when we put on the Edelbrock cross ram intake manifold. And it's interesting, you know, in comparison to the gains we got from the Holley on the cathedral port application, where we basically picked up power everywhere, the Edelbrock, I mean, and I think probably that's just a function of the, relatively speaking, the LS3 intake on the LS3 application being a better match for that combination than the truck manifold is for the cathedral port application. That LS3 manifold is just really hard to beat. But the cool thing about this cross ram is it basically did better than the factory intake almost everywhere, with the exception of a short RPM range from 5,300 RPM to 6,100 RPM, where the factory intake was a little bit better. Both above and below that, so from 3,000 up to 5,200, and then above 6,000 RPM, the cross ram was better. So it's an interesting thing. Normally we see, if you take a look at that intake shootout that I pointed out, if you take a look at that, there are other intake manifolds that do better than the factory LS3 manifold. They make more peak power, but that's all that they do. If they're a short runner single plane manifold or a fabricated one or a high ram or something, they make more power, more peak power usually than the factory LS3, but they only do it at 6,500 RPM or 7,000 RPM. And all the rest of the curve is usually a big trade-off. But on this cross ram, it obviously looks cool and it makes more power. It made a good bit more torque, where the factory LS3 made about 527 foot-pounds. The cross ram made 543 foot-pounds, and we had a good gain here at 4,700 RPM. We went from 523 to 543, so a nice 20 foot-pound gain there. So the cross ram looks cool, just like with the Holley one on the Cathedral-Port application. It looks cool, and it obviously performs well. The one thing is, it is a cast aluminum piece, and it's quite a bit heavier than the factory intake is, so that's something to consider. You know, there is a weight penalty, and weight, as we know, power-to-weight ratio is very important. But most guys, honestly, that would be putting this cross ram on there, they would be doing it because it looks really cool, and it has 2 throttle bodies, and as we know, 2 throttle bodies is definitely better than 1 throttle body. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Let's get to our conclusion. Now that we run the Holley cross ram on the Cathedral-Port application and the Edelbrock cross ram on the Rec-Port application, what do you guys think? A lot of guys think cross ram setup, definitely a race intake. I mean, they look awesome, but as we showed here, the long runner intake actually improves power through most of the RPM range. I mean, compared on the Cathedral-Port application, that Holley piece outperformed the truck, even down low. In fact, most of the gains were down low. That's from the long runners. Same thing on the Rec-Port application with the Edelbrock intake. It performed as well as the LS3 intake, which we know is hard to beat from all the other testing. It did very well at the bottom and at the top. So what do you guys think? 2 throttle bodies, cross ram intake, 2 turbos. I'm Richard Holder, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Let me know what you think about the cross rams. Make sure to comment, and I'll keep testing.